Imagine buying your dream house on the hill with panoramic and spectacular views overlooking the Pacific Ocean, San Francisco Bay, the Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, and Alcatraz. The view is priceless. Then imagine one day your neighbor below you gradually allows their trees and shrubbery to grow and block your precious views, and then refuse to do the neighborly thing, the legal thing, and trim their trees to unblock your once fabulous views. Now add insult to injury. After repeated attempts to get your neighbor to act in a neighborly and a legal way, you have to go to court. Yep, you gotta sue your neighbor to enforce the law, the county ordinances, and then fight a 20-year legal battle, which you finally win. But by that time, your spouse has died and both of you have missed those last precious years of your lives enjoying the fabulous views you once treasured so much. Well, this story is such a story. And today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in Trees and Neighbors, what you need to know to examine how Barri, Kaplan, Bonapart at Bonapart and Associates successfully represented Lloyd and Phyllis Bishop and got justice for them in their 20-year battle that went all the way up to the California Supreme Court, waged by these neighbors who were misguided by hatred, anger, foolishness, and a lack of common courtesy. Barri, Kaplan, Bonapart has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in San Francisco, in California, and in the nation. She's one of the Bay Area's most knowledgeable practitioners in the area of tree and neighbor law. She advises homeowners, arborists, attorneys, and public entities regarding personal injury and property damage caused by trees, trespass, nuisance, and encroachments. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Sausalito, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce Barri Bonapart to the show. Welcome to the show, Barri.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your practice of law, because it's rather unusual, isn't it?
I've been told so. I practice tree and neighbor law. My website is treelaw.com, and I help regular people resolve issues or disputes they're having, generally with neighbors, over tree issues.
And sometimes it can be pretty dicey, can't it?
Well, actually, it can be extremely dicey, even more contentious than family law, because at least in family law, somebody usually moves away, whereas with your neighbor, you're faced with each other day after day.
One of the cases you handle, and this is the reason we're here today, is the case of the Bishops versus the Haynes.
Yes.
Two neighbors.
Yes.
Tell our audience a little bit about what this case is all about and who Phyllis and Lloyd Bishop are.
Well, when I met Phyllis and Lloyd, I believe they were 85 and 91 years old. They had been married 60 years to each other. They were retired school teachers. And the home they bought in the hills in Oakland, California, they bought their home in 1964, and it had these amazing panoramic views of the San Francisco skyline and the bay. And they enjoyed those views and their neighbors for 20 years. The Hayneses moved in 1984, about
below them,
and to the west, about 20 years later, and started allowing their trees and vegetation to grow up to obstruct the view that the Bishops had enjoyed for so many years, and really was the reason they had bought that house. And you can see as the years progress how the view became more and more obstructed.
Now, the Bishops asked the Haynes nicely to do the neighborly thing to cut down the trees.
They asked in many different ways and offered in many different fashions to work with them to try and resolve the problem. And not just to remove the trees, but to cut them in some fashion that would be acceptable to the Hayneses, but also maintain the views for the bishops.
Yeah, and I want our audience to know that you as a lawyer, your first response is not to sue people. You actually get involved with trying to resolve things amicably, right?
Right. There are a lot of attorneys out there who shoot first and ask questions later. I'm not one of those attorneys. I work very hard first to try and give my clients the tools to work directly with their neighbors, even without the involvement of a lawyer. And if that doesn't work, then to work directly with the other side, collaboratively if possible, for example, through direct negotiations or mediation, to try and resolve the dispute in a way that works for both sides.
Right.
I know it's an overused phrase, but in a win-win type of situation.
Yeah, and you are, I would say your general theme is being a peacemaker.
Absolutely, in fact.
In fact, your license plate on your car says peacemaker,
That's right.
So if you see peacemaker, that's you, right?
That's me.
Now, I understand, and we don't want to get into the technical legal parts of this, but as a result of their lobbying efforts, in 2004, 2006, the Oakland City Council changed or clarified the ordinances so it would cover them, correct?
Exactly. The next step the bishops did was to go to their city council member and to say, look, here's what happened. This is what one judge did with this ordinance that we know is meant to protect everybody in the city of Oakland. Can you clarify it, please?
Yeah.
And the city did that.
And this, as a result of that, you eventually won the case.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Then I first met the bishops in 2007. And we attempted to work with them again, offering to mediate or arbitrate or negotiate directly. And only when none of that worked did we file suit in 2009.
You eventually won this suit, they appealed it. I think it went all the way to the California Supreme Court, didn't it?
We did. We won. The judge ordered every single tree that was obstructing the view to be removed. The judge ordered the cost of that removal to be borne by the Hayneses.
Yeah.
The judge ordered a view corridor established above which no future vegetation could grow.
Yeah.
So that it wouldn't just be a one-time deal, but would be lasting forever. And the judge also ordered the Hayneses to pay over $200,000 in fees and costs that the bishops had incurred, as the judge saw it, unnecessarily because of the Hayneses' bad faith.
Now, unfortunately, Lloyd passed away, which is unfortunate because they hadn't had the trees cut down yet, had they?
Not at that point.
So for the last 20 years, they didn't have the view that they originally bought, did they?
Exactly, exactly. Although Lloyd was at the Court of Appeal oral argument, and we went out to celebrate afterwards, and we believed that he knew in his heart of heart that he was going to prevail.
Today we're lucky enough to have Phyllis with us, and we're going to bring her on in a minute, and I want our audience to know that Phyllis is 95 years old.
She is 95, God bless her.
I have never met anybody sharper than her, so let's bring her on right now. I'm very pleased today to have Phyllis Bishop with us. Welcome to the show, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Boy, we've heard a lot about you. Your lawyer, Barri, has been telling this ordeal that you went through for 20 years when these unruly neighbors wouldn't cut down their trees. What did you think?
Well, I was very disappointed, of course, because we approached them in a neighborly fashion and said, pointed out the fact that we had already lived in this property for 20 years. We had dealt with 6 owners before them, and whenever a few trees grew up or bushes that were impinging upon the beautiful view that we had bought, we simply spoke to them about it, and they said, oh, well, go ahead and trim those off. It was all very informal, and we were used to that kind of neighborly give and take. But when we approached these particular neighbors with the same plea that some of your vegetation is growing up into the beautiful view that we had, we'd like to talk with you about cutting those down. Their response to that was to erect a chain link fence between our 2 properties and to post no trespassing signs. It's pretty hard to negotiate under those circumstances.
Right. Did they ever say to you, stay away from us, we're not going to help you. We don't care what you think. Did they ever say that?
Well, perhaps not in exactly those words, but they certainly implied that.
Yeah.
The response that we got, even we offered to buy the property on which the offending vegetation was growing. We went that far. Everything we could think of. And their response was, don't try to tell us how to manage our property.
Now, Barri told us that they own 3 properties, one in Hawaii, one in Oakland, and some other place.
Napa.
Right?
And one in Napa.
And so they're not at this property all the time.
No.
They're never at it. They rented
rented
out.
it. They rented the property.
They lived there for a few years.
I'm sure if I was in your position, I would have said, you know, how does it harm or hurt you to cut down trees that the top of them don't make any difference to you? Why is that such a problem? Did you ever get an answer from them?
Well, no, I'm saying what the definitive answer was. No matter what you say about how reasonable this may be, don't tell us how to manage our property. To me, this is an evidence of the territorial imperative that people have to protect their land. I thought perhaps this was the first land these people had ever actually owned. That was what I felt. They were so possessive about it.
Now, in the end, you had to file a lawsuit against them.
Yes.
You're not usually in the business of filing lawsuits, are you?
Never have before.
You never filed a lawsuit in your life, except this turned into a 20-year battle, didn't it? During all that time, did you ever see them in the street? Did you have any communication?
Yes, once or twice, yes.
And would they ignore you or not say anything to you?
No, we would speak, and we did have one arbitration session.
Yeah.
In which we sat at the table together, and in which the arbitrator left us alone. I've often wondered what she expected might happen.
Right.
What we talked about was something else entirely. The possible undergrounding of the utilities in our neighborhood was what we talked about.
And not about the problem that you were there for.
No.
That's amazing.
I know. Kind of surreal.
So eventually the justice system worked in your favor, didn't it?
Well, I guess so. With the help of a very competent attorney, yes. We wouldn't have been able to do it alone. Yeah, but we tried.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that for 20 years you lost those beautiful views.
Yes. And the view was important to me emotionally.
Yeah.
I was born in the Bay Area, but when I was 5 years old, my family moved to the Sacramento Valley.
Yeah.
And I was raised in the Central Valley. And I tell you, it gets hot in the summer down there. I mean 100 degrees. And there's no relief, and there's nothing like a bay anywhere near. And when I was old enough to come back to college, to the University of California, I was so enchanted with the view and the hills around the view.
Right.
They were just like an oasis.
Yeah.
And when the time came when I could actually buy a piece of that, have it be my own, and live there and glory in that view, I did for 20 years until these people moved in.
Right, and then they just took it from you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for being on the program.
I'm so glad you're doing it.
And I'm glad you came here today, and we wish you well. It is my great pleasure to introduce James McNair. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you.
You're an arborist, aren't you?
Yes.
And on a case like this, when you're dealing with trees and neighbor law, what exactly do you do, and how did you help in this case?
I was asked to assess the essentially the nature of the view obstructions, and so what's involved is looking at historical photographs and looking at the type of trees or vegetation causing the obstructions, document that. And so often a lot of it's photographic work where I'm documenting current conditions and comparing that to historical conditions. Yeah. And then following up with recommendations for remedy to change the situation so the claimant.
Are you, when you follow up with recommendations, are you also aware of the local city or county ordinances that deal with this?
Yes. The format we use is we're following the standards of resolution that are often codified, and you need to follow that procedure to document and come up with the proper recommendations.
So Barry, we had mentioned something about the local ordinances and how they were improved upon, if you will, in 2004 and 2008 in Oakland, okay?
Right, 2004 and 2006, they were clarified.
What exactly does the ordinance say? You know, in layman's terms, what does it say?
The Oakland View Ordinance, like many view ordinances, attempts to create a balance between the rights of the tree owner and the rights of the view claimant.
Yeah.
And it comes up with a process for resolution, which you're required to go through before you can file a suit. And so in the Oakland case, you have to try initial reconciliation first and offer to arbitrate.
Excuse me, is there an ordinance that says if your tree blocks your neighbor's view, you have to cut it down?
I haven't seen one that's worded in that way.
Then how is it interpreted where the homeowner whose tree is blocking the view ends up having to cut down his tree?
So as Mr. McNair explained, many ordinances have what we call standards for resolution.
Yeah.
And
are you talking processes for resolution?
No, actually criteria that the trier of fact, whether it be an arbitrator or a judge, would have to go through in deciding, first of all, is there an unreasonable obstruction?
Yeah.
Because that's the threshold issue.
Yes.
And if there is, what do you do about it? And there's a series of criteria that's listed in most ordinances and in the Oakland ordinance as well, that the judge has to go through in deciding what should be done, if anything.
Right.
And that's where the consulting arborist comes in.
Before we came here today, we asked our many people who call into our show, we asked them to submit questions, and I'm going to throw some questions out at you regarding tree and neighbor law. If my neighbor's tree branches hang over my yard, can I trim them?
We get that question all the time.
What's your advice?
And the common belief is that you have an absolute right to cut whatever's overhanging on your side of the property line, but that's actually not the law. Since 1994, in a case called Buska versus Patel, if anybody's interested, the court stated that the test is one of reasonableness. You don't have an absolute right to cut off overhanging limbs or sever over encroaching roots. Rather, you have to act reasonably. The court, unfortunately, didn't go on to explain what that meant. So when people ask me, I say basically it means you should follow the golden rule. In other words, if you were the tree owner, how would you want to have the situation handled? And most people say, well, I first would like somebody to pick up the phone and say, hey, we've got a problem here. How would you like to handle it? And then if that doesn't work, then maybe write a letter. And if that doesn't work, then maybe take matters in your own hands, but being very careful, using experienced people to do the work and making sure that you're not causing harm or damage to the trees.
So there is no definitive yes or no?
Well, as with many aspects of the law, there's a gray area there and a continuum.
Here's another question that came in. Most of a large tree hangs over my yard, but the trunk is in the neighbor's yard. Who owns the tree?
That actually is determined by the Civil Code. Civil Code sections 833 and 834, which basically say wherever the trunk stands will determine the ownership. So if the trunk is wholly on one person's property, even if roots or limbs are over somebody else's, it's owned by the person on whose land the trunk stands.
Right.
If the trunk stands on more than one person's property, then it's owned jointly, kind of like in tenants in common.
So as I'm listening to all of your answers, here's what I'm coming up with. I'm coming up with the tree and neighbor law is a rather gray area. And what judges like to see more than anything else is a process of trying to work it out with your neighbor first.
Exactly. Judges hate these kind of cases.
Yeah, do things in a reasonable fashion, a good neighborly fashion, etc. When that doesn't work, then sometimes the judges have to step in and apply law or what they consider would be a reasonable decision in these kinds of cases, right?
Exactly.
So it's the process.
It's following the golden rule, basically. Treat thy neighbor as you would be treated.
And as our population grows, there's going to be more and more cases like this, especially in affluent areas like where we are right now, where views mean dollars, don't they?
Well, there's that, and there's also the ever-increasing sense of people who have too much time on their hands, a little bit too much money, and a sense of over-entitlement. In other words, what's mine is mine, and what's yours someday will be mine as well.
Well, you know, this show has been very informative, and I really appreciate both of you for being on the program. And I want to thank you very much for inviting us out here. I want to thank you for coming, and let's hope that everybody resolves their disputes amicably in the future. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.